Good evening, everyone. We apologize for the technical delays that had a bit late, but thank you, every single one of you, for joining us tonight for our art conversation. This is our second edition this year of our art conversations. If you missed the first one, we were talking about arts and activism YouTube page. And this one, we are talking everything energy sector in Africa. And before I go too far, my name is Nyeledi Furumele, and I am the founder of hashtag Boss Girl. And hashtag Boss Girl is the mother body that houses these amazing conversations. Tonight, I'm joined by an amazing panel of Black females who are making their mark within the energy sector, and they come and hail from different parts of our continent. But what is so exciting is that they all bring different things onto our platform. So I'm going to first start with Linda. She hails all the way from Namibia, and she is a renewable energy engineer. I didn't even know that existed, but apparently it's a thing. And she's going to tell us a little bit more about that as we're going through our conversations tonight. And her passion is for rural grid renewable energy solution. I'm not quite sure what that entails, but as we go, we're going to get a little bit deeper into that. And then we have our two ladies who hail all the way from Nigeria. Crystal, who is an energy and project lawyer. Didn't know that existed before until we started having this conversation. So I'm also not quite sure. She's going to explain what that entails, what that brings into our conversation, and she's going to tell us how that sort of ties into building sustainable long-term developmental energy solutions. It's tricky, these English words. And then Ifunaya also hails from Nigeria. She is a qualified in petroleum engineering. Those are as a difficult term because I'm sure some of you are like, I don't know what that is, but that's okay. She's here and we're going to do the amazing things. And what she does currently is she's responsible for innovative gas to power projects and creating extensive financial models within the energy sector. So I think all of them, as you can hear, have got an amazing repertoire within the energy sector because they each bring different things. So without further ado, I'm going to start with Crystal. And we're going to start with an opening statement before we get into the bits and pieces of what's happening in our continent. Crystal, I'm going to start with you. Please don't forget to unmute yourself when you go live. I'm going to ask you questions, an opening statement. Is Africa in the midst of an energy crisis? Why? Crystal. Technology seems to be failing us. Crystal, are you still with me? Okay, let's start with Ifunaya then for now.
Hello, can you hear me? Sorry.
No, I can hear you.
Uh, Thank you, Yeleti. So like you mentioned earlier, an energy and finance lawyer here in Nigeria, and what that means is that I advise in relation to investments in energy projects, be in relation to whether it involves energy generation, distribution, or in some instances of renewable energy solutions. So we advise on the financing and as well as the project structuring as now to question about if the continent is in an African crisis. When you look at what's going on in several of the various African countries, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Chad, which has very limited private sector involvement. And of course, what this means is that the state in most instances bears majority of the burden on energy provision, supply and delivery to homes, and that there is inadequate within sub-Saharan Africa. So I think the answer is yes. We definitely are in an energy crisis, and you see this very much prevalent in the fact that it social enterprise in general. And when you find that majority of communities and I guess cities and rural areas, particularly within the continent, have very limited power in rural communities, you see that if we're not careful, we're going to be left behind. Africa will just be left behind in terms of development, because as we all know, energy drives to an extent development of almost every other aspect in relation to not just countries but the entire African continent. So yes, we really are in a crisis, and we need to consider what can be done to tackle the issues and problems that the sector is facing across the entire continent, but within sub-Saharan Africa.
Okay, Ifunaya, you're next.
Hi everyone, my name is Ifuna. I'm a business developer.
We can't hear you, Ifunaya. I think I had the same problem. I think you have to click on able mic, I think.
Yes, Ifunaya, can you say that again?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, yes. Now we
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
can hear you.
Okay, apologies for that. I'm a business analyst. For the purpose of this conversation, we're going to be breaking it down into easy terms so everyone can understand. And what that basically develop gas to power opportunities across my target market is sub-Saharan. And just like Crystal said, there is an energy crisis ongoing in Africa. And this is because, about a large percent of our population doesn't have access to electricity. Once you bring it down to sub-Saharan Africa, a major amount, up to 50% of people don't even have access to clean energy, and cooking is the major source of energy. And if you put that in context with the energy transition ongoing, so you'll be hearing energy transition where the world is trying to move into cleaner energy sources, it's also a big problem to us because most of the major sources of energy, it's largely fossil fuels. So for us, we have to grapple with how to get enough funding to be able to new projects, and also consider the fact that the world is moving into cleaner and greener energy. So for us, it's not too late, but that we need to start getting onto. We have the resources, we have the people, we just need to figure out and articulate policies and strategies to be able to take.
Okay, Linda.
Thanks, Nyalati. Hopefully you can hear me from your side.
Yes, we can hear
Yes,
you.
we can.
So renewable energy engineer, I'm actually an electrical engineer. I just specialized in renewable energy and energy efficiency. That is basically focusing on sizing and designing solar systems. Mostly that's what I'm currently focusing on for rural communities here in Namibia specifically. But back to your question, Nyaleti, on whether we're in a crisis as Africa, we definitely are. We are one of the fastest growing continents in terms of population in Africa, in the world. And supply definitely cannot meet demand. We are fortunate in Namibia to be one of the few countries that does not experience load shedding. But if you look at the largest countries in Africa, which is South Africa and Nigeria, for example, shedding is a problem there. But we do have the resources, like Ifuniana mentioned. We just need to see how we can utilize them best and really make the best out of those resources. Thanks.
Okay, so if we can just pause it right there. There was an issue that I'm trying to solve now all of a sudden, because on my side it's showing me flames. Okay. Okay, that technology showing me flames today. So now, I think it was Crystal who said in the beginning that we have the resources to in Africa in order to power up our entire continent, for instance. But we are seeing problems within the continent where power, what is the term? Connectivity, for instance, is unreliable. Like for instance, in South Africa, we've now become used to things such as load shedding because our power resources just are not within our country. And all of you have reiterated the same thing, that we are currently going through an energy continent. What are the, in your individual capacities, for instance, energy engineer, what are some of the things that you think, not necessarily as just Namibia, but as a continent, we should be focusing on? What should be our move forward in order to alleviate our insistent use on coal, for example, as our source of energy?
Nilekti, that's such a tricky one, but uh, we can't completely get rid of coal and gas. I'm sure if Nana would kill me if I say let's get rid of the whole coal and gas and petroleum. We have to make a proper mix that really works for us as a continent. Some of our countries are rich in oil and gas, like Nigeria, for example. Namibia, on the other hand, we are one of the driest countries, but we have one of the best solar irradiation in the world compared to countries like Spain, for example, that are very developed in CSP plants, that's concentrated solar power plants, where you can generate electricity from solar, but not just the normal way like solar PV. So definitely making use of our renewable energy resources like hydro as well. That's one that we can also utilize. And then wind as well. Some of the countries are rich in wind, and then also bringing coal and gas to the mix to just see how we can make the bring enough energy to the continent, and also falling in with that clean energy goal that the world is also still running after. Yeah.
Okay, I guess for me, what I would say is you're right. Nigeria has significant reserves in terms of oil and gas, but in some regions, particularly the north and southwest, you also find an abundance of renewable energy reserves. So I think that within the African continent, we boast of reserves that could potentially solve the energy issues that we have. But I think that what would help is to encourage investments in renewable energy, and one way that be done is by policies that incentivize investments in renewable energy. So, for instance, if you had a policy provided tax reliefs for investments in solar, hydro, biomass projects, it could increase competition within that sector, and then you know what that would now translate to is an increase in that sector. Because I think what is lacking is not the resources. What is lacking is investment in these sectors, and as we all know, we do need those investments to get mix of renewable energy. And if you look at countries like Ethiopia and Kenya, yeah, who have an amazing amount of their power energy, it shows that it's possible that can be done. I think for Kenya, almost 90% of their energy is gotten from renewables. So what I mean, like we mentioned earlier in the beginning of this conversation, the world is moving away from oil and gas, and we're transitioning to a more sustainable energy solutions. So I think for me, what would be good is getting those policies in place, encouraging and enabling business environments for us to feel comfortable enough to bring in capital to invest in these projects. And if we have a significant amount of that, I imagine that it will go a long, provide like additional generation capacity, which for countries like South Africa that are heavily reliant on, they can then begin to transition to a more renewable energy economy.
Yeah, because
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like Crystal. Different countries have their different.
Yes, go ahead.
Some countries are, excuse me. Some countries are stronger. For example, Nigeria has a lot of. Um, Nigeria has a lot of oil and gas resources. That is, we can't completely 100% reliant on new energies. It's just not possible because of intermittent nature. So for things like basically coal and gas will still play a role. However, what we're trying to be achieve here is more of like an energy mix that kind of will I say works with what your country has. And to Crystal point, in major parts of it is investment. So what is really as investment? When you talk about renewable energy, it's very hard now to access funding for fossil projects. For me, I think one way Africans can go around that is to into African funding. I'm glad that the ACTA has come to stay. I believe that we should be able to leverage within ourselves to be able to access funding for fossil fuels, because those kind of really difficult now to access, given that the world is moving towards the greener future. But we have our own path, and our own path to chart. So as Africans, we need to be thinking what is best for us, and a lot of it policies and enabling societies. You know, when there's unrest, it's very hard for businesses to prosper. And so once governments can sit down and articulate policies that actually stimulate private investments, I believe that that can go a long way. And I don't think that I think that both coal, gas, hydro, solar, wind also make a part to play. And that's what we should be focusing on, getting that investment, working together as a continent to fund ourselves, bring up that funding for ourselves, and also making the environment really stable for external investors to feel confident and to be able to come and play into the investments are secure.
So I hear a lot of money needing to be done in order to go through these processes, because obviously switching from one version to the other isn't going to be overnight, and it's not necessarily going to be something where if you don't have the funds or the know-how, it's going to be easy for you in order to build or with it. So how are you, Crystal, as a energy and project finance lawyer, like how are you working with, I don't know, either the people within your within the energy sector who are trying to get in, and the legalese? Because I know some of the times, if you don't know the term, I don't know, but like, how are you working with the people within the sector to say, hey, this is a viable option to move to in order to move from coal, let's move to solar or whatever? What is it that you are doing in order to try and make that shift easier for the other players or the smaller players in the energy sector?
Okay. I think that one of those instances, we power with, and by we I mean my firm Alex. We power with Power Africa and USAID, and we have these webinars where we try to involve stakeholders in various African countries. Let's pull our heads together. Let's consider how can we these issues that we find prevalent, particularly for startups who are trying to invest in the energy sector. And for Nigeria, for instance, we have the Renewable Energy Association of Nigeria, and what they've been doing has been providing capital intensive projects, particularly for rural communities, right? And then you have the Rural Rehabilitation Agency, which is called REA for short, and what they've been in terms of providing capital for startups that are very much intended in investing in sustainable energy projects within rural communities. So, for example, they would typically have a World Bank fund which would provide maybe like a 40% or 30% capital investors or startup founders who particularly are invested in the rural areas, because what we find with the centralized, and by that what I mean is, so I would assume that for majority of us listening to this call, we have an idea of how power and how it's distributed to our homes and our businesses and commercial complexes. So the idea is that majority of the rural communities are underserved. They don't have adequate power supply. So that is why you see that the rural agency is very much interested in those regions. So if you're interested in actually investing in projects, particularly within those communities, there will be some capital that will be given to you to assist you. And then more often than not, you would also get a legal team that will put you through the legalese and all that, in terms of what kind of contracts do you need to put in place to ensure that you have a good power purchase agreement between you and your off takers, which in it is. So what we can see is the communities will come together and form an SPV. That's a special purpose vehicle where you form a company particularly for a particular and specific purpose. So they would come together, would be contracting with that SPV for the community. So by in the contracting arrangement, who you have as the off-taker would be the community SPV, and then that way having that capital intensity ensures that for a certain 40% covered, and they're bringing equity and debt of 60%, which sort of helps to alleviate the nature of energy projects. And what we found that does is to encourage investments, and we've of startups come on stream that are heavily focused on providing off-grid solutions using renewable energies for rural communities who have very limited access.
So currently, obviously, we know that the rural areas obviously is going to be a big focus of this conversation because they're the ones who are left behind. How long do you think? Let's focus first on Nigeria, then we'll go to Namibia where Linda is. How long do you think that switch will take for renewable energies or um, a different type, solar, gas, and all those other things to uptake in those communities? Because obviously we also need to look at the kind of infrastructure that they need, and one community might not necessarily have the same infrastructure as another. So how long do we think it will take for rural communities in Nigeria, for example,
Okay.
completely off the grid?
Well, for me, I've always been a big advocate of a decentralized energy system where, so Nigeria operates a federal system of government, and what that means is that we have a federal parastatal, and then we have states. So everything particularly when it concerns energy, the majority of it happens in the federal structure, or rather in the federal arm. And what this means is that power then transmitted and then distributed. So a large aspect of the transmission is still handled by the federal government, which is Nigeria in essence. And I've been a big advocate of let's decentralize the system. Let's allow states and communities to source out their own power, source out investments for energy generation and distribution, set up utilities, and in some instances, like there's a very popular market called the barrier market. We've seen that happen in a Sabon Gari complex as well. So we actually see that sometimes, in terms of decentralized system, it's something that would work if all parties involved are able to collaborate together. And by this, what I mean, let's allow states to make their own laws for power generation of power and distribution. And what that would mean is that the states will be able to set up their own mini transmission grid within their states, incentivize in power generation using solar, hydro biomass, or wind, which we have a lot of waste go lying around. And so if these are put in place, I'm sure that it will be very soon before rural communities would have good access. So if that federal structure element to power generation and supply, if we allow states to be more in generation and distribution, I think that within half a decade we would be able to at least get to a substantial amount of energy access for rural within Nigeria.
Linda?
The picture is a bit different here, but the villages are still the ones that are mostly disadvantaged. They are the ones that do not have access to electricity. But what tends to work here is small off-grid systems for like a small home. Those small kits, they tend to work for the villages. That's what the communities can afford, the individual homesteads, mainly because the utilities can't, they don't want to invest in transmission lines to go to the villages, because the rate of return on the investment is almost zero, and it takes years to get their money out of the villages. So because I also work in a retail environment, what I've seen working is really the small kits, and it's sort of clearing the energy crisis from the bottom up, because you're starting with a rooftop panel on your own roof, and then instead of waiting and hoping for that large scale energy plant to rock up at the village. Yeah, I think that's one way that we can tackle it, not only in Namibia but in Africa as a whole.
Yes.
Yes, I agree with that. But the size, um, let's start with the one solar panel on the rooftop, then the small off grid for the village. Cause yeah,
You, Crystal and Linda were talking, and you were talking about decentralizing the power grids and all the things that were taking place. Yes. And my question to Ifuna, if you can hear me, was they're talking it and using alternative renewable energy sources. And one of the things that was on your bio was the fact you are a fan of clean energy. Let's talk about what clean energy is and what clean energy would look like in a rural setting in terms of the infrastructure.
Well, in terms of infrastructure, I hope you can hear me now. In the city, I mean, clean energy basically is solar, wind, yeah. We would say when we refer to clean cooking, we're talking about using LPG, which is gas. I'm actually an advocate of using gas for a country like Nigeria more than renewable. I mean, use what you have is always what my principles would always be. But in terms of infrastructure, I mean, solar.
But we have
Yeah, do, but we have because of the way it's the oil and gas is already mature. It seems like a better way to go. I mean, it's in my opinion. That's, I mean, I guess I'm an advocate. But for urban cities, we can always work here on getting solars on our roofs, and things like that. That kind of just work side by side with what we have. So it's all about system in your house. Looking at it in the whole is efficient. When you don't have switch, when the sun is high, you can easily switch to renewable and just using the most efficient energy that is possible at that very moment.
So I heard Crystal because she was wanted to jump in when you were talking about being an advocate for gas instead of solar, for instance, to the use of gas as another form of energy.
I'm not. But I guess the question is, and Linda made that point, which is also I think it happens in Namibia, and we also have that here in Nigeria, is that the grid doesn't extend to the rural areas, and to extend that's extensive, I mean, huge capital investment that we know for a fact that the government is not willing or ready yet to do that investment. And I think that applies to majority of the countries within the continent. So I would think that a more realistic view of to go about it rather than waiting for it to okay, because you need the government needs to be able to extend it because they own and operate the transmission grid in majority of the African countries. So rather than waiting for that huge investment to happen to occur, rather, why don't we encourage investment in energy so that the rural areas can have or whatever other renewable solutions that is possible to have within those areas can be possible. That's what I would advocate would be a more realistic view to go about it, because we've had instances we want to at least have achieved 90% of electrification, and we're not anywhere near that. To put it in perspective, Nigeria has an installed capacity of 16,000 megawatts, but what's available for delivery is just about 4,000 megawatts in any of over 200 million people. Obviously, the power is not enough. So I'm saying that, okay, implement this with what with renewable energy sources that we have in abundance here. Let's encourage that those private sector investments, because it wouldn't need to have you wouldn't need so much will I say government in trying to develop. In fact, they would, even though even currently they encourage investment in renewable energy. So I'm saying that it's solutions that are possible now. Why we future where the grid has the capacity to take on more, because even now, like I said, we have an installed capacity, and that what that means, sorry for using that jargon down, what that means is that if you total the amount of power generation assets that we have in Nigeria, they are capable of producing 16,000 megawatts. But now that is not able to be transmitted because the capacity of the transmission grid is limited. So rather than adding more gas solutions, why don't we try to have system that do not require movement of that power to the grid? We have them on site in rural communities, and these communities are able to actually achieve power supply, or to a certain extent. That's my own approach to go about. I'm sure in the future we can get to the point where we have invested in gas pipeline infrastructure and all that. But for now, it's more realistic, considering how the world is even moving, is to actually make those investments so rural communities can begin to improve in terms of industry, and basically their quality of life in general.
Linda, I was reading an article about Huawei and how partnering with different countries in Africa, and they're using their technology to help rural parts of countries of Africa build their own sort of sustainable energy resources. Is your country, Namibia, taking advantage of the type of technology that is available that can be used instead of saying to the government, money? Are there technology people within your country that are saying, we have this to offer? How can we partner with so and so who is within the energy sector to build whatever we need to build in order to house more capacity within the rural areas?
Thanks, Nyeleti. To be honest, in terms of technology in rural areas, we are not there yet. People in the rural areas often tend to not have access to Wi-Fi and data and so forth. So the best way of like educating our rural and village people is still going there with your feet and having a poster and going house to house and giving them the advantages of using a renewable, for example, over firewood in the house and so forth. So it's still we have a long way to go in terms of utilizing technology to reach out to our rural areas, but hopefully we will get there one day. Yeah. So in a nutshell.
So, are we not, as a continent, are we failing on those developmental goals because we're not using what we have? We're waiting on outsiders to come and say, guys, this is what you have on the continent, please use it in your countries.
I wouldn't say exactly like that. It's also because of lack of I would say income in the rural areas specifically. But you still find one with a small solar torch, for example, that's like cheap. They can afford that. But use for heating, for example, they still use wood fire and kerosene. Nothing is wrong with kerosene again, but like when it's burning and wood is burning, it emits those CO2 that can be dangerous to their human health, for example. But it's slow progress really in the villages. As much as we have a passion for the rural areas to like really utilize renewable energy as fast and as soon as possible, It's a mindset as well to just get someone to use, for example, charcoal briquettes, which are considered much more energy efficient instead of wood. It's a mindset. It's a huge mindset. So apart from capital investment as well in money that is needed to deploy renewable resources, it's also a mindset shift that we need to put in our people.
So, Ifunaya, there was a big discussions a few years ago in South Africa. I don't know whether in Nigeria that was something that was considered, nuclear as a source of, as an alternative source. Is that realistic in our specific context?
I mean, so nuclear is possible. There are currently nuclear, but I know we all know the major accidents that have happened with nuclear, which is like, and I guess people's body language with nuclear is, if you're going to do it, you have to do it. I guess the issues in an African context is more of the let's say technical know. I believe that if that capacity is developed within the continent, that's a very good and viable option because it's actually clean energy. To invest massively on technical know-how and putting the safety aspects in place, because a nuclear disaster that has widespread impact. So it's for us to, I mean, it's a possible option. Question, but while looking at it, we have to understand that for our context, I mean, you need a skill, and we'll have to learn to develop those skills. Such a project, because any misstep with that can affect a large number of people.
So currently, where we are now, we are not ready for that kind of technology because of the lack of skills that we possess in Africa. Is that what you're saying?
I think so. I think I mean, I think that things like oil and gas and fossil fuel and even renewables, we have tech, technical capacity and know-how. But I'm not really sure if there are numbers of nuclear plants in Africa.
I think South Africa is the
So,
only operational nuclear plant.
So I mean, in the whole continent. So,
I think Ingeleti, is that correct?
also,
I was going to ask.
Yes, no,
So it just twinkle around that a bit if it's actually operational, because the news says it's operational, but I wanted to from Unity if that is the case on ground.
So we were also hearing the same news. That's why I brought it up, because we heard the same news about it, that they were going to start it, and then there was a big scandal how it was acquired and where all these things had happened, and then it just sort of died down. So as a citizen, honestly speaking, right now, I don't want to say yes, it is operational, because I'm not sure. There were rumors that it was operational, and then there were rumors that no, it's not going to be operational yet. We're still in the building phase of it. And it was just the way it was communicated was very that is why I was like, when I was reading the articles, is there's a lot of emphasis on moving to nuclear, but no one was giving relevant case studies about where the plants are, or are they active, are they not, if they are, capacity do they have. So from my side, I actually cannot give you a definite answer on that, because we're not sure as well. It was just it was tricky. Maybe once I post this, I'll write in the comments if I was.
Okay, that's good.
Operation.
I know there was news in the future, saying that Tanzania was planning on one, but like back to the point of a lot of it will have to go with the really just explaining, because body language towards nuclear is, I mean, it's risky, and while there is one in I think it has to do with the way it's communicated because it's a very touchy one. Um, but not to say that it can't be done. I mean, there's one is being developed in 2025. With the technical exchange within countries to be able to make sure that we develop that area, but it's still very.
I agree with you, Funaya. I think that it's a lot of technical know-how is really required to harness it as a means of as an energy.
And the amount of time that it takes into construction of a nuclear plant, you can go as high as 5 to 10 years just to get it on the ground to start operating. So definitely in agreement with you, ladies. Mm.
So then, is our government, are all our governments who are pushing for nuclear, are they pushing it because of trade agreements or relationships they have with certain countries, or are they themselves being misled about what this could mean? Because I think a lot of the time when we hear it, it's, oh no, it's because we're trying to add more to the grid. But if Linda is saying 5 to 10 years, different ball game, then it's because we're not even sure even after the 5 to 10 years whether it will indeed give what it promised. So is nuclear an African pie in this, basically?
I think that
Um,
that
yeah.
question would be more you in reality because I think most of for us, I speak for Nigeria, and I think if Funaya will like us here, we're not even considering nuclear at the moment. We are trying to harness renewable energy sources that we have and sentiment as well. So it's not something that we are paying much attention to, at least speaking for most of the countries that I walk around.
Mm. So
Linda?
from Namibia, we are one of the largest uranium, like we have very rich uranium resources as well. It was one of those things that were put at the table as well, but the advantages of why perhaps they might be advocating for it in your country in reality is because once you have it running, you're basically sorted. But like the two ladies have already outlined, the tricks and the amount, the complexity that comes with it is another challenge on its own. So you rather not have it. So currently we do import, for example, quite a lot of nuclear raw material to other countries out of Africa that still have nuclear plants that are operating. But to set up a nuclear power plant for Namibia, for example, it's yeah, it's still very baby steps.
Okay, so um, because we had technology issues, unfortunately, it's not a soccer match where time waits for the technology to catch up with us. I want each and every single one of you ladies tonight who's joined us. What is the one takeaway you want someone who's watching this to go home with in terms of what we've discussed? Obviously, our discussion wasn't at length as technology, number one. Number two, there was just so much that we could not, unfortunately, unpack within this single discussion. So the aim, hopefully, God willing, is we'll be able to have to continue this discussion on a specific thing in a. But for now, what is it? Whoever's watching, um, what is it that you want them to take away from what we've already spoken about? I'm gonna start with Linda.
Um, from my side, really, it's just we have the crisis, but we have the solution as well. We are one of the richest, if not the richest, continent on earth in terms of raw material and resources. Everybody knows it except Africans. So really, let's just solve our own African problems with our African solutions, like I think Crystal mentioned at the beginning. And we are well able. With time, the resources we have them, but with time, we will get there as Africa. I'm fairly optimistic.
I think what I would say is what I would like to see more of is actual within the African continent. And this is within the context of free trade, letting goods and services go, countries, and in the context of funds. We need money, and we might not be able to get the monies that we want or the projects that we want. Africa needs to start in essence, and just by funding ourselves, just not we have our own race to run, and just really just making sure that we are more connected to each other. And that's why I'm really glad about this art conversations. These are women from different countries here trying to actually talk about and it starts with things like this and actually progresses into regional conferences and whatnot. We need to be able to make solutions tailored for our situation, and we can do it. We're in a step in the right direction. So it's just for us to collaborate, make funding available for ourselves, make sure that there's free flow of exchange of information, trade, and ideas.
Crystal, you have the last word.
Right, thank you, Yeleti. So I mean, the ladies have said it all, but I guess what I would really want to reiterate is with agreeing amongst ourselves that Africa is in an energy crisis. What I would like anyone to take out of this is that we have the resources, as Linda has said, but than what we need to encourage. If you're a startup or if you're someone that is considering creating a startup, consider issues around the energy industry. And what a lot of people don't realize is that these days there are a lot of African DFIs and by that time financial institutions who are willing to invest in energy projects so long as they are viable. So if you're thinking around consider the energy sector. There's a whole lot of assistance you could get in terms of you want to create a distribution utility, particularly within Nigeria and several other African countries. So we would really encourage everyone that is considering the issues around energy in Nigeria or every other country within the continent to understand that we can do it. And as Ifunanya said, let's look within our I think a lot of when you look at the AFTA, that's the Africa Free Trade Zone, Continental Free Trade Zone agreement. There's potential for collaboration in the continent. Let's see how we can utilize that to increase energy access within the continent. And lastly, I think the last point I would want to also within the African continent, there's several DFIs that are actually trying to invest in renewable energy and projects within the continent. We have the Africa Development Bank, who has a several billions in a sustainable that is currently in place, and they're considering how they would, release this money to viable projects that are going to increase. So we can do it. We definitely can do it. It's just for us to put in the right structures in place to ensure that in the next decade, so we're able to get to a considerable amount of energy supply and access across the continent.
Yeah, African solutions to African with collaboration within Africa. I think that is the golden thread from every single thing that you ladies have said tonight. Thank you for joining us.